Hey, welcome back to AI Tech Hub. I'm Techie. So today, we are tackling a topic that causes just a massive amount of head-scratching in the tech world. Data engineer, data analyst, data scientist. These three job titles get thrown around constantly, sometimes almost interchangeably, and honestly, it genuinely confuses people, especially those of you who are trying to figure out which path to actually pursue. But hey, don't worry, by the end of this explainer, you're going to understand exactly what separates these three roles, and just as importantly, how they actually work together in the real world. Okay, let's dive into this.
Right, let's start with why this confusion even exists in the first place. You'll often hear that all three of these roles, work with data. And yeah, that's absolutely true. All three often know some Python, they know some SQL, and they definitely show up in similar-looking job postings. But here's the problem. Saying someone works with data is incredibly broad. I mean, think about it. Saying someone works with words doesn't distinguish between a novelist writing fiction, a journalist breaking the news, and an editor checking grammar. They all use words, sure, but they do vastly different things. And the exact same is true right here. These are genuinely different jobs, with different daily responsibilities, different skill emphases, and totally different outputs.
So here is our game plan for today's explainer. We're going to look at the job title confusion, break down a really helpful weather forecasting analogy, define the three data roles, talk about where the lines blur, walk through an e-commerce synergy example, and finally wrap up with a recap and next steps.
All right, let's jump right into part one, getting past this job title confusion.
And to do that, we're going to use a weather forecasting analogy. As we just touched on, despite overlapping tools like Python or SQL, the day-to-day reality for these professionals couldn't be more different. So to untangle this cleanly, let's use a mental model. I want you to think about a weather forecasting operation. What's really interesting here is how it breaks down a complex operation into three genuinely different jobs that all revolve around the exact same underlying subject, which is the weather. Okay, step one, someone has to actually build and maintain the physical weather stations and sensors, right? That's the infrastructure collecting the raw data like temperature, humidity, wind speed constantly and accurately. Step two, well, someone else takes all that collected data and reports on what already happened. They're the ones telling you, hey, this week saw 3 inches of rainfall, which is well above average. And finally, step three, someone entirely different builds complex models to predict tomorrow's weather. Even if, they still occasionally get it wrong and ruin our weekend picnics. But jokes aside, it's three completely different, totally essential jobs.
So keeping that in mind, let's map this directly to our three data roles.
Definitely keep that weather analogy right at the front of your mind because it maps perfectly onto our three mysterious tech titles. We're going to break down the data engineer, the data analyst, and the data scientist sequentially, kind of like characters in our story. Let's start with the data engineer. In our analogy, they are the weather station builder. If you watched our previous explainer on what a data engineer actually does, or our deep dive into Snowflake, this is going to sound very familiar. Data engineers are the unsung heroes who build and maintain the systems that collect, clean, and reliably deliver data in the first place.
The absolute crucial point here is this. Without solid weather stations, there is literally no reliable data for anyone else to work with at all. Period. Notice how a data engineer focuses heavily on infrastructure. They're building data pipelines, they're managing distributed systems, and setting up cloud infrastructure like data warehouses. They make sure data flows in reliably and is totally trustworthy by the time anyone else even touches it. So their core skill set leans very heavily toward pure software engineering.
Okay, next up we have the data analyst. Think of them as the meteorologist reporting on what already happened. A data analyst takes that beautifully clean, reliable data that the data engineer's systems just provided, and they use it to answer questions about the past and present. What happened? How often did it happen? How does this month compare to last month? This is known in the industry as descriptive analytics. They're describing what has already occurred. They're essentially the detectives of the data world. Looking at their core skills, a data analyst might build a dashboard showing this month's sales trends, or write a really detailed report explaining exactly why customer complaints spiked last week. Therefore, their tool belt leans heavily towards SQL to query the data, data visualization tools to chart it out, and honestly, most importantly, clear communication. Their entire job is turning raw numbers into a clear, accurate, and easy-to-understand story about the past.
And finally, that brings us to the data scientist. If the analyst is the reporter, the data scientist is the forecaster predicting tomorrow's weather. Instead of just describing what already happened, a data scientist acts a bit like a fortune teller. They try to predict what will happen next, or they run experiments to uncover much deeper, hidden patterns that just aren't obvious from looking at a standard report.
So this brings us right into the realm of predictive analytics. A data scientist might build a complex model to predict which customers are likely to cancel their subscriptions next month. Or they might run rigorous experiments to figure out if a specific product change actually caused more sales, rather than just correlating with them. Now, while they definitely use the same programming foundations as the other two roles, their core skills lean heavily into advanced statistics, machine learning, and experimental design.
All right, so that's the ideal state. But let's talk about where the lines blur. Because let's do a quick reality check here. In the real world, things are rarely this perfectly segmented. The truth is, these lines blur constantly, and it often depends a lot on the size of the company you're looking at. At a small startup, one person might literally wear 2 or even all 3 of these hats. You might have a data analyst who's frankly forced to build simple pipelines because, well, there's no data engineer on staff. Or maybe a data scientist who spends 80% of their time just cleaning messy data before they can even think about building a cool machine learning model. However, at a large enterprise company with dedicated teams and huge budgets, these roles genuinely specialize exactly the way we've described today.
And just to add one more layer to the confusion, job titles simply aren't perfectly standardized across the tech industry. Some companies might look at the predictive modeling work a data scientist does and label that exact same job a machine learning engineer. This lack of standardization is exactly why you have to look at the daily responsibilities, not just the title on the job listing.
Let's move past the theory and look at an e-commerce synergy example.
We need a concrete business scenario to see this in practice. Imagine an e-commerce company that desperately wants to reduce customer churn, meaning people canceling their subscriptions. Step 1, the data engineer builds and maintains the pipeline that reliably captures every single customer interaction, logins, purchases, support tickets, and lands it all in a clean, organized data warehouse. Step 2, the data analyst then studies that historical warehouse data and finds a purely descriptive yet highly valuable insight. They say, hey, customers who don't log in for 2 weeks are far more likely to cancel. Step 3, the data scientist takes that specific insight further. They build a predictive model that scores every single current customer's likelihood of canceling in the next month based on dozens of behavioral patterns, which allows the company to proactively reach out and save those customers before they leave. See? 3 different roles, each depending entirely on the one before it, all working from the exact same underlying data. It's a beautiful system when it works.
Okay, let's wrap this up with a quick recap.
That synergy we just walked through is exactly why understanding this triad is so incredibly important. Let's pull it all together so you can walk away with a rock-solid understanding. To summarize, the data engineer is your station builder, entirely focused on infrastructure. Without them, you've got nothing. The data analyst is your reporting meteorologist, focused on looking backward and describing what happened. And the data scientist is your weather forecaster, focused on looking forward and predicting what comes next. That is the real difference. It's not overlapping confusion. It is just 3 different, essential jobs working with the exact same data.
And that wraps up our breakdown of the data triad. If this helped things click for you, make sure you're subscribed because we are breaking down complex concepts like this in every single explainer to make your learning as efficient as possible. But I want to leave you with this final thought. As AI continues to rapidly automate basic coding and basic reporting, which of these 3 roles, the engineer, the analyst, or the scientist, do you think will be the most bulletproof in the next decade? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next explainer.